Hello, people. Welcome. Good evening. I'm so happy that you're here. I was trying to clean my glasses because I got to do a little bit of reading, and I'm just every other Monday we have our St. Vincent de Paul uh, conference meeting, and tonight we had the district. No, what's above district? Anyhow, the state president and the state chairman of the board. Visited our conference this evening. Oh, what a great meeting. Just unbelievable. And then the spiritual lesson this evening was just outstanding as well. So I stayed a little bit longer than I should have, but so I could be here in time to do this. And I didn't get everything taken care of, but there we go. Got most of it taken care of. So good evening. Triple G Farms is here. So is Pat Butler. So is Little Lone Prepper. Looks like we've only got one, actually. No, there we go, 6. All right, it updated to 6. So welcome. Good to see you. And for those of you who are watching the replay, I'd like to welcome you too. Please don't forget, you can always subscribe and you can hit that like button. Theoxorus, there's another one of our great participants. So anyhow, for those of you who are watching this on the replay, or this is the first time watching it, we do a Monday night Civics U.S. government class discussion, explanation, try to better understand our government. Tuesday nights we do a book, and tomorrow night we're doing the introduction and first 4 chapters of Food Storage for Preppers, a week-by-week plan for surviving an apocalypse. I try to put out at least 5 recipes and then show you the components of those, whether it be freeze-dried or canned goods every week. And I try to put out 5 prepper tips every week. And those are going to be shorts, 1 minute. Sometimes I put out a little bit longer, more elaborative video, but that's not on a regular basis. So the regular ones are the 2 lives, the 5 recipes, and the 5 prepper tips. And I try to get those out on a weekly basis. May try to do more. Right now, I'm trying to catch up with my reading, and I want to take the first Saturday of next month, first Saturday in March, I want to take my technician and general license for ham radio. So I'm kind of boning up on that as well. And so, we're a little bit on the busy side. Theoxorus says that his book came in today, a day early, so maybe he'll be prepared for tomorrow night. It's not that intensive a reading, and they're not that long. So I think you can probably get it done, probably with your character, probably have it done in 15 minutes, 15, 20 minutes max. And then you'll probably generate a whole bunch of great questions and comments too, knowing you. KP Heathen, good evening. Welcome from Louisiana. So tonight we're going to talk about 3 major forms of government. Now, we have to go back and remember what was going on when our government was formed. So 1776, of course, was a revolution. 1785 is when we passed the Constitution. So what was happening? What was in the minds of these guys as they wrote this thing called the Constitution? And so tonight, the discussion is going to be about those forms of government. We talked a little bit about democracy versus aristocracy versus theocracy versus republican versus chaos or anarchy. And so, all those different types of governmental structures. And we decided on a republic, which is basically a democracy with constraints. Okay. The best way to describe the difference between a democracy and a republic: a democracy, you see something happen, you don't investigate or anything else. There's a posse. They say, let's hang the guy as long as 51% majority rules. Say he's guilty, let's hang him. They hang him. With a republic, they say 51% say let's hang him. The sheriff says, no, can't do that. That person has rights. They're entitled to a trial by jury of their peers. They're entitled to this. They're entitled to that. And even then, when we do, a guilty conviction in our jury system, it can't be a simple majority. It has to be a plurality. It has to be everybody has to vote guilty and for the death sentence. So there can't be any exceptions. It has to be beyond a shadow of a doubt. So basically, democracy is mob rule, and republicanism is a form of democracy with constraints, a constitution. Now we have to talk about, okay, now that we have this republic, how do we set up that republic? How do we get the people in the places and what places and who elects what. And remember, we have 13 independent states, okay? And so those states have been colonies, and each one had their own charter under the king. So the idea of the concept of a United States didn't happen until the Revolution. And they tried and we'll get into a little bit more of this. They tried the Articles of Confederation. They didn't work. And I'll show you the faults with that in comparison to a Unitarian government versus a federal government. And so let's go ahead and get into that. And the example that I'm now we are following the book. We're on chapter 3, so right after the Constitution, and it starts out that on April 24th, 2010, Arizona Governor Jan Brewer signed into law the nation's toughest immigration regulations aimed at identifying and deporting illegal immigrants. These regulations go so far as to authorize local police officers to stop and question anyone they think may be an illegal immigrant. Those detained must produce evidence of citizenship or legal residency. So, even 2010, what we have now, the immigration issue was an issue back then. President Obama noted that the bill's provisions undermined basic notions of fairness that we cherish as Americans, as well as the trust between police and our communities that is so crucial to keeping us safe. So supporters of the Arizona bill, however, charged that the state government was fully within its right to enact the legislation. Does this sound familiar with what's going on now in Texas? The Constitution grants the national government supreme authority over foreign affairs and presumably including immigration. But the reserve powers of the 10th Amendment, that's the one that gives the state control over everything that's not enumerated in the 16th Amendment, 23rd Amendment, as well as it is the 16th. Isn't it the 16th? 16th Amendment is income tax, or is it the 23rd? Oh, gosh. As long as it's not enumerated in the income tax, yay, the 16th Amendment. Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes on incomes from whatever source derived without apportionment among several states and without regard to race, color, creed, all that kind of stuff. So anyhow, except for that one, as well as what's mentioned in Article 1, Section 8, those are the enumerated powers. That's what Congress is allowed to do. If it's not in one of those two, then it's reserved for the states, and according to the 9th Amendment to the Constitution, if it's not given to the states, then it's given to the individual. So, hi, Sue Me, welcome. Pat Butler, Little Lone Prepper, South Florida, DCL. Butch Graves, welcome. Golly, great people tonight. Let me see. Look at that. Fioxer's got his book today. He's already skimmed it. He's doing good for tomorrow night. And all right. Looking forward to seeing you tomorrow night then. Okay, so we got the same notion, the 10th Amendment versus the federal government. So then the question becomes one of, if the federal government doesn't fulfill its responsibilities, does that automatically go down to the next level of government, which is the state? That's the big question. So it says here, but the reserve powers of the 10th Amendment also enable states to take action when the federal government doesn't. Illegal immigration is a serious problem, and lawmakers in Washington, D.C. have long avoided. In fact, Arizona lawmakers are not alone in filling the void of federal legislation. Now, remember, this book is written in 2018. 2011. So this book is already 12 years old, okay? So what the book says is 48 states have enacted more than 200 laws dealing with immigration at the state level. So this is as of 2011. I'm sure there have been lots more since then. Arizona has more practical experience than most lawmakers in Washington, D.C., and that enables the state legislatures, who live on the border, to craft a solution that best suits their needs. It also enables states to act as laboratories of democracy and test solutions to political problems that may later be adopted by the national government. So in July 2010, this sounds just like Fifth Circuit Court, the decision, the injunction against cutting the wire and everything else, then up to the Supreme Court for the Supreme Court order. In July 2010, a district court judge issued an injunction to stop the enforcement of many of the most controversial provisions of the Arizona law. So, we've had this conflict between, you're supposed to do this, and if you don't, then we have to. Well, that's kind of like what's going on with Eagle Pass right now. The federal government sued and said, you have to give our law enforcement officers, the Customs and Border Protection, access to that park that you have sealed off so that they can do their job. And so I don't think we are not going to have a resolution to this issue until we identify and agree upon what is their job. So what the National Guard is doing is they're saying, listen, we believe that you believe that their job is to process illegal immigrants and disseminate them inside the United States. We disagree. That is not their job. Their job is to protect the border so that they don't enter here in the first place. We feel that you are not doing that job of protecting the border and stopping them from crossing. Therefore, we are going to do that. The federal government is arguing you can't stop us from doing our job, which is processing and shipping those illegal immigrants into the country. We'll see. That's going to be determined probably by the Supreme Court. For sure, it'll be determined by this next coming election in November. Hello, Utah Mike. Welcome. So, in the Federalist Paper number 5, James Madison highlighted the unique structure of governmental powers created by the framers. So here's the quote. The power surrendered by the people is first divided between two distinct governments and then subdivided among distinct and separate departments. Hence, a double security arises to the rights of the people. So who are those two entities? The federal government and the state government. And then the departments become either the executive departments of the federal government or all the other governments subservient to the state government. So county governments, city governments, municipal utility districts, all those other different kinds of things. So he further says, the Constitution lays out the duties, obligations, and powers of each of these units. So issues involving the distribution of power between the national government and the states affect you on a daily basis. You do not, for example, need a passport to go from Texas to Oklahoma. There is one national currency and a national minimum wage, although the states may set higher wages. But many things vary among the states. And we talked about that last time when we talked about the 10th Amendment, and states can set their own laws. For example, we talked specifically about drinking ages and marriage ages and age of majority and things like that. So those things are determined at the state level rather than at a federal level. Okay, so if we take a look at the numbers, okay, there's one U.S. federal government. There are 50 state governments, and this is as of 2011, so imagine what it is now. There are over 89,476 local governments. So there are 3,033 counties in the U.S., 19,492 incorporated cities, 16,519 townships, 13,051 school districts, and 37,387 special districts. Those are going to be your municipal utility districts and fire and protection districts and things like that. So when you add all those together, there are 89,527 government entities in the United States. So we need a little bit of clarity about what are they, what are they subservient to? So if we take a look at it in the Constitution, it says that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. However, when the Constitution doesn't say something, then that is reserved to the states, and then from the states to the people. So let's talk about this federal system that the framers of the Constitution gave us. There are three basic types of governments, okay? So let's talk about the Unitarian government first. So the Unitarian government is basically what Britain gave us. So you have one king, okay? Then you have all these lords in their areas, their lands that they owned. In order to be a lord in England, you have to be a property owner, okay? Because you would lord over the people who lived on those properties. And then, of course, you had the House of Commons. So the king is the one who gives the authority to the lords. So look at it. We're going from top down. We're going king to the lords, to the House of Commons, the representatives, the parliamentarians. They call them MPs, members of parliament. And then it goes down to the people. Okay. So that's a Unitarian government from top down. Then we have a Confederate government. And that's basically what the Confederacy was, the South, when they declared their secession from the U.S. And originally there were only 13 states that seceded, and then they eventually became 13. But anyhow, that was a Confederate form of government. So with the Confederate form of government, what happens is the people elect their state governments, okay? And then the state governments elect the officials for the federal government. So the people don't have a direct vote in the federal government. They only have a direct vote in the state government. And then whoever they elected to the state government are the ones who choose and vote upon what's going to happen at the federal government. So that's a confederacy, okay? Then we have a federal government. So a federal government, the citizens elect the state government, and the citizens also elect the federal government. So both of those governments are basically elected by the citizens, okay? Now, when the framers took a look at what was going on, we did not want to return back to a Unitarian type of a structure. We didn't want a supreme authority who then delegated authority or gave rights or gave permission to act or warrants or commissions to do things. What we wanted was something more along the lines of either the Confederate or the federal system. I was reading Pat Butler's comment, see if I needed to respond to it, but it looks like you guys are having your great chats again. So what our framers gave us was a combination of a Confederate system and a federal system. Okay, so look at the beauty of this. We elect the representatives, and the representatives elect because they become in the electoral college. They represent us to elect the federal government, right? But we have direct votes in the federal government as well. So you've got this merging of the two. But then we also have a Confederate government because we elect our state legislatures, and the way the Constitution was designed, the legislatures appoint the senators, who then also are electors in the electoral college and help choose the federal government. So we kind of had beautifully a combination of both: a federal system where the citizens were involved in everything, and a Confederate system where the states were involved in deciding how the federal government was going to be. Now, that was done away with the 17th Amendment. So let's get to the 17th Amendment. I hope I'm right. Oh, please let me be right. Please, dear Lord, let me be right. There's the 17th. Yes. The Senate of the United States shall be composed of 2 senators from each state, elected by the people thereof. So until 1913, the Senate was appointed by the state legislature. And then in 1913, we had direct election of the senators. Okay. Okay, so that's kind of where that is. So let's go to national powers under the Constitution, and then we'll talk about state powers and concurrent powers, okay? So the national powers are enumerated powers. Those are Article 1, Section 8. Declare war, coin money, write articles, bills of attainder, and all those different kinds of things. Now, there are some that are expressly prohibited. The federal government cannot do in the Constitution. Let me see here. Where is it? A bill of attainder, for example, is prohibited. But there are certain powers that are reserved to the federal government under Article 1, Section 8. Might as well read that. It's kind of lengthy, though. Article 1, Section 7. This is why Obamacare was actually unconstitutional, because it was actually originated as Senate Bill 2, and they had to raise revenue in order to provide health care. So Article 1, Section 7 says, all bills for raising revenue shall originate in the House of Representatives, and Senate Bill 2 didn't. But the Senate may propose or concur with amendments on other bills. Okay, so Article 1, Section 8. Let me find here. Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, pay the debts, and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. But all duties, imposts, and excises must be uniform throughout the United States. They have the authority to borrow money on the credit of the United States, to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and with the Indian tribes, to establish a uniform rule of naturalization and uniform laws on the subject of bankruptcies throughout the United States, to coin money, regulate the value thereof and of foreign coin, and fix the standard of weights and measurements, to provide for the punishment of counterfeiting the securities and content coin of the United States, to establish post offices and post roads, to promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing for limited times to authors and inventors the exclusive rights to respective writings and discoveries. And we call those copyrights. To constitute tribunals inferior to the Supreme Court, to define and punish piracies and felonies committed on the high seas and offenses against the law of nations, to declare war, grant letters of marque and reprisal, to make rules concerning captures on land and water, to raise and support armies, but no appropriation of money to that use shall be for a longer term than 2 years, to provide and maintain a navy, to make rules for the government and regulation of the land and naval forces, to provide for calling forth the militia to execute the laws of the Union, suppress insurrections, and repel invasions, to provide for organizing, arming, and disciplining the militia, and for governing such part of them as may be employed in the service of the United States, reserving to the states respectively the appointment of the officers and the authority of training the militia according to the discipline prescribed by Congress. So the militia, there's two parts to the militia. There's a standing militia, the regular army, regular military, and this is defined in the Militia Act of 1903. Let me check here real quick. Let me do a Google search. I think it's the Militia Act of 1903. And then it defines that the rest of us are, okay, so the original one was 1792, Militia Act of 1903. Yeah, there we go. So, also known as the Dick Act. So we had the modern National Guard, the standing National Guard, and then we also had you as, if you're between 18 and 60, you're part of the militia as well, the unorganized militia. So, and so that's that part. Remember, we quite often get the phrase that the introductory clause for the Second Amendment says, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So who is the militia? It's any person between the ages of 18 and 60 is a member of the unorganized militia. So that means everybody's under that initial clause, everybody between 18 and 60 is authorized to have shall not have their power to infringe, to have an arm, let's call it. Well, certainly not in my lifetime. I hope not in yours, since it happened in 1913. But it used to be that before they could vote on something in the Senate, they had to go back to their legislature and get their legislature to do it. So the interesting thing here is, right now, we have 51 senators who are elected as Democrats, but we have 51 of the 51. So that's, right at 50% plus. But we have 26 states with predominantly Republican legislatures. So we would have a different component of representation in the Senate if it were done by the states rather than by the individuals. So that I can see that part right off the bat. I would say that would be a major change right there. The other thing is, looking out for the rights of the state versus the individual. So, trying to keep the rights of the state and the rights of the individual kind of balanced. You are so right, Diana, too. So right. And here's another thing. Of course, we take that 1803, January 1st, 1803 letter of Thomas Jefferson to the First Baptist Church of Danbury, Connecticut, which was a personal letter between him and a minister. And the left likes to turn that into law. And it says, so the Baptists felt they were being persecuted, and they wanted the federal government to intervene and protect them from the persecution of the other religions in that area. And Thomas Jefferson said, no, I can't intervene. There's an inseparable wall between the rights of the government and religion. So I cannot intervene on behalf of your religion and force other people to accept it or force them to leave you alone. I can't do that. So that's what that was all about. But now it's one of those most misquoted things that says there's separation between church and state. The separation between church and state that we currently have was the Johnson Act, and the Johnson Act was passed, I want to say in 1963, but let me look that one up. So anyhow, Lyndon Johnson was running for the Senate, and he asked his local church 1934, I'm sorry. So he asked his local church to endorse him, because up until that time, churches were the number one place where these guys wanted to do their campaigning, was get up on the pulpit and have the church endorse them and say, yeah, this is our candidate. And the church that Lyndon Baines Johnson attended said, no way we're endorsing you, no way. So when he got into Congress, he said, you know what we're going to do is churches are no longer allowed, because of that 1803 letter, churches are no longer allowed to talk about politics in the church. If they do, we're going to withdraw their tax exempt status. So churches are no longer allowed to talk politics as a result of LBJ, because his church would not endorse him. Amen, Theoxorus. You are so right. So if you also take a look at how the Constitution was written, it was written so that we would have a set of generic, general, over-encompassing laws that, in order to change them, would take time. They would take deliberation. They would take concentration. They would take prayer and thoughtful discussion. And you're exactly right. Our government is supposed to change on a very slow pace, and not the rapidity that we have now. And so we've lost that. And I think that's part of that other problem. If I could repeal the 17th Amendment, I would repeal it today. I think that would be one of the best things we could do, as far as probably getting some balance back into our government. But we've, especially FDR, one of the biggest abusers of the Constitution was FDR. We'll talk about that here in just a minute. So anyhow, when we take a look at the national powers, Article 6 of the Federal Constitution underscores the notion that the national government is the supreme and natural law of the land, especially when it comes to interstate and ultra-state, that is federal versus state. And it's called the Supremacy Clause. Okay, so state powers under the Constitution. The 10th Amendment gives reserved, especially like police powers, to the states. So let's take a look at where there's national powers versus where there's state powers versus where there's concurrent powers. Let me make sure I'm caught up with here on the chat. Gosh, you guys, thoughtful questions. Thank you. So the national powers are the enumerated powers in Article 1, Section 8. Collect duties, impose excises. Then, of course, the 16th Amendment tells them that they can collect income tax, regulate commerce with foreign nations, among the states and with Indian tribes, establish rules of naturalization, coin money, establish post offices, declare and conduct war, provide for Army and Navy, make laws necessary and proper to carry out Article 1 powers. Okay. Then we take a look at the state powers. So the states set the times, places, and manners of elections and appoint their electors that go to the federal government to elect the federal level. So we get to choose the day that we actually do our state elections. We choose, for example, here in Texas, on a general rule of thumb, that we do our state, county, city, municipal utility district, fire district, everything else, school district. We like to bunch those all up and have them concurrent with any federal elections. Because what it does is we can put it all on one ballot, and it just saves an awful lot of time and money, where everybody goes to the ballot box once and just votes on all the different levels of government. And I think that, however, has become confusing, because people think that because I'm voting for president and a senator and a congressman and mayor and school board president, and that all those things are interlocked into the same government, and they aren't. Each one is an individual and distinct form of government from the others. And so I think we cause that confusion that a lot of people have about, the differences among the state governments in the way that we conduct our voting. I think that that's part of the problem. Good night, Utah Mike. So glad you can make it for a while. Okay. So if Oxford says the way that stupid and bloated bills get signed so fast is part of their game to subvert our entire system, long-term plan, multi-generational by someone nasty. Yes. So here's how that goes. I've only got 48 votes in the Senate. And I go to a friend of mine and I show him the bill and I say, look, I really need your support for this. He says, well, I could support that, but my people really need a new subway system. And so if you could just add on a rider to that bill that you're going to also include $1 billion for a subway system, there's no way I'd vote against it. So, now I have 49 votes. So now I go to the 50th vote and I say, hey, I really need your support for this. So, well, I could support that as long as we need a new airport. So I need a couple $1 billion to build an, oh yeah, I'll do that. So they add in a new multi-billion-dollar airport. Then they try to get the 51st vote and they say, hey, you know what we need? And they say, well, you know what I'd really like for you to do? I'd like for you to declare at a national level that, the drinking age is 18. Okay. Well, we'll do that. We'll include a rider in the bill saying that. Okay. And so now they do all that. And so now you have this bloated bill with all these riders that, and then when somebody says, you know what, I object to that $5 billion airport, then how does it get reported on the news? Senator so-and-so from somewhere and where says they voted against a bill to fund the Border Patrol and close the borders. Well, sure, he voted against it because he didn't want to spend $5 billion for a new airport out in the middle of the Nevada desert. So you can twist that, see, and they do that quite frequently. So when you hear on the news that so-and-so voted against this bill that's immensely important, look and see if there aren't some underlying rider bills that they were actually voting against, not the major bill. I'll give you a good example. The Defense Appropriations Bill, and I forget what year it was, but it was back when Nancy Pelosi was Speaker of the House. She inserted a bill that gave enough money to BART, the Bay Area Rapid Transit Authority, to build an extension of their rail line from Ghirardelli Square all the way up to the front gate of Salesforce, one of our major donors. Now, it just so happens that that rail line, when it goes from Ghirardelli Square up to Salesforce, goes right by a building that her husband owns. So if you put a stop there, what happens to the value of a building if it is right on a subway or a train stop? Man, oh man, does that increase the value of that building or what? So she included that rider in that Defense Appropriations Bill. Well, if you voted against defending the country, you were voting against the bill to make Nancy Pelosi's husband richer and her number one donor, or one of her leading donors, richer. But so see how that works. And so that's how our government has been corrupted. I believe that we should have simple bills. You vote for this bill on the merit of the bill, no riders. And that's one of the things that our last president wanted, was what he called clean bills. No riders, no amendments, no nothing. Let's vote on the issue at hand and vote on that and have a clean vote. And we either agree or we disagree. And if we disagree, let's go back, rewrite it, and bring it forward. You are so right, Diana, too. I believe that is, and Mark Levin wrote a book, The Liberty Amendments, and really good book. I support every amendment that Mark Levin promotes in that book, the Liberty Amendments. I don't know when it came out, but I'm going to say probably about 2010. I agree. You are absolutely correct, Feoxerus. I wholeheartedly support that as well. And we have had years where, even though the Constitution says you must pass a budget yearly, what was it? One of the years that President Trump was the president and Pelosi was Speaker of the House, she deemed a bill passed. They never voted on it. She just said, okay, we're going to say it's passed. It's deemed passed. And we got to get by. We got to get rid of stuff like that as well. Then, of course, for Obamacare, there's a Senate filibuster rule that you have to have 60 votes to get it out of committee and onto the table for presentation for voting. And then once you get it on the table for voting, it should have 60 votes in order for it to pass. Well, Harry Reid, when he was Senate Majority Leader, suspended the rules. So he got it out of, because they only had 51 senators. So he got it out of, no, I'm sorry, they had 50 senators. He got it out of committee with 50 votes. And then the vice president, Al Gore, voted for it to come out of committee. So then it went to the floor, and he suspended the rules a second time, and they voted on it. And it was a tie, 50-50. So Al Gore broke the tie on that vote as well, making it so that we had Obamacare. And that was Senate Bill 2 of that year. And and then Article 1, Section 8 says that that's illegal. I'm sorry, Article 1, Section 7 says that's illegal, because it had revenue in it to raise money in order to pay for Obamacare. It should have originated in the House of Representatives and not in the Senate. So all kinds of shaky things that went on there. I think there's way too many people who are afraid of it. They don't understand how the convention works. And so they're afraid that they would pass some crazy things. But when you take a look at the system, and you have to have, I think it's 2/3 votes, 2/3 of the states approve it in order for it to be ratified, then, they misunderstand that. They don't understand that. They think it's just going to, new constitutional rules are going to be put into place for us. So let's read Article 6. The Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made, of which shall be made under the authority of the United States, shall be the supreme law of the land. And the judges in every state shall be bound thereby, and anything in the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary notwithstanding. The senators and representatives, before mentioned, am I reading the right thing? Maybe it's Article 5. Yeah, it is. I was reading 6, I'm sorry, and it's Article 5. The Congress, whenever I was right, 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to the Constitution. So you have to have approval of 2/3 of both houses. And let me see. And then 3/4 of the states have to ratify it. So that's an awful lot of votes to change the Constitution. So, and there are some of them I would like to see. For example, age limits. I would like to see term limits on representatives and senators. I would like to see a balanced budget. There's a lot of things that I would like to see. I'd like to see single item bills before Congress. So there's some good things in there that Mark Levin talks about. Okay, so states' rights. Ratify amendments to the Constitution, take measures for public health, safety, and morals, exert powers to the Constitution does not delegate to the national government or prohibit the states from doing, establish local governments, and regulate commerce within a state. Then there's concurrent powers. So there's the concurrent powers are taxation, borrowing money, establishing courts. So each state has its own law. So you have a state Supreme Court. You also have a federal Supreme Court. So you can go from your local to a district court, from a district court to state Supreme Court, then jump over into the federal system saying that it violated your federal rights, like MEP versus Ohio or Danny Escobedo versus Illinois or Miranda versus Arizona. Those famous landmark cases originated against the states. And then they had to go up to the U.S. Supreme Court. So that's that concurrent power of the judiciary system. So they can make and enforce their own laws, charter banks and corporations, and they can spend money for the general welfare. So that's kind of where they overlap. Okay. Now, we have had, especially under FDR, a couple laws that kind of usurped states' rights and exceeded the authority of the president and of the federal government. Let me get into where I know they're in here somewhere. Oh, I like this one. Marshall in 1803 said that the Constitution specifically calls for the national law to be supreme, and that included taxation. And this was in 1819, McCulloch versus Maryland. And it says that the power to tax involves the power to destroy, wrote Marshall. So what McCulloch versus Maryland was Maryland said that anybody who wanted to do business had to do it on special paper that they had to buy from the state. And so they were even forcing the federal banks and post offices to use Maryland paper that had to be bought in Maryland. And so they said, no, wait a minute, you can't do that. You're taxing the federal government. You're taxing people at the state to use the federal government. So that's where this taxation could be basically destroying an entity. Because if that federal government bank, federally registered bank, didn't use the state taxation paper, then basically they would be shut down because nobody can do business with them. So that's what John Marshall was talking about. The power to tax involves the power to destroy. We get into dual federalism. And so the Dred Scott decision, for those of you who don't understand or did not know the Dred Scott decision, he was originally born a slave, lived under one family. That family sold him and his family to another family. The husband of that family that passed away. So the wife inherited everything. She moved from a slave state to a free state. And then from the free state, she moved to Missouri married another man. And so Dred Scott said, I'm a free man because of federal law. Basically, at that time, the separation between North and South, if a slave was taken from a slave state to a free state, they were granted freedom. That was the law. And so because the family had taken him to Ohio, which was a free state, and then moved to Missouri, which took him back into a slave state, he said, no, I was a free man when you took me to Ohio. And so basically the Supreme Court reversed itself on following state laws and agreed upon laws and said, no, he had to remain a slave. But crazy decision, very crazy decision. It went against everything else that was written at that time. And so basically, the court ruled 7-2 that Scott was not a citizen of the United States and therefore had no authority to issue the complaint in the first place. Slaves, said the court, were never thought of or spoken of except as property and not as citizens. And only a citizen can raise a case in court. So then we have nullification. So nullification is the right of a state to basically said, you know what? That federal law does not apply in our state. We nullify it. We're not going to follow it. And we see that happening right now with marijuana. So marijuana is, according to the Drug Enforcement Agency and according to the law of the land, it is a controlled substance. It is a mind-altering drug. And it is a controlled drug, and it is an illegal drug according to federal law. A lot of states have nullified federal law, saying we are not going to enforce that law in our state. So, for example, in California, if you get picked up by, and you have a certain amount, and you get picked up by city, county, or state police, they can't charge you because they have said we've nullified the federal law and we have our own state law. You have to have this much in order to now be in violation of our state law. Okay, so you can, as long as you don't exceed the amount that the state says you can have, you're in compliance with the state law. However, there's still the federal law. So if a federal DEA agent comes up and catches you, regardless of how much you have, they can charge you under federal law for violating the federal law, even though you're in that state. So that's where you have those concurrent powers, right? And even though the state has nullified it, a federal law enforcement officer can still enforce federal law on state or local property. So it gets kind of confusing there. So then we take a look at everything kind of changed from 1913, basically, with the beginning 16th Amendment, 17th Amendment, the doing away with the state legislatures appointing the senators, and you've got the 16th Amendment income tax. Both of those were in 1913. We've got World War I ginning up. This is an interesting thing. Do you realize that all of the what do we call them, monarchs that were involved in World War I were related to each other within two layers or two what do you call it? Cousins, basically. Okay, let's check on chat. Supreme Court hasn't been so supreme in their rulings. I think their mission also needs to be re-examined. It's up to, there's a lot of subjectivity in that. The Dobbs decision, for example, what they said was that Roe v. Wade was erroneously, that number one, the right never existed. It's not mentioned anywhere in the Constitution. And then the second part of that is, if it is to be decided, it's not specifically mentioned in Article 1, Section 8. So according to the 10th Amendment, if it's not mentioned in Article 1, Section 8, then the states have the right to make that decision. And Roe v. Wade overrode the 10th Amendment and said, no, we want to nationalize one standard of whether or not. Whereas in reality, according to the Constitution, I agree with that. The Dobbs decision said, no, we need to go back to the Constitution. The Constitution says it's a state decision, not a federal decision. Now, if we disagree with that, we have an opportunity to use the amendment process to change that and say, hey, they do have the authority to make this decision. Let me see. I don't know. The last I have heard is it's still a Schedule C drug, and that as far as DEA is concerned, it's an arrestable offense. The Habsburgs were one of the families, yes, and as a matter of fact, King William's, is it William? No, King Charles's father changed his last name because he was directly related to the Habsburgs. And when World War II happened, he wanted to be more closely aligned with the Brits, and he had rights to claim either house, either Britain or Germany. So he changed his name and became a Briton last name instead of a German. But gosh, Belgium, Sweden, Spain, Russia, Germany, England, and Austro-Hungarian Empire, they were all within second cousins of each other. So it was something else in World War I. Okay, so cooperative federalism, the growth of national government. So this starts with the New Deal from FDR. FDR started in 1933. A lot of things started happening in 1933 that you have to question. We're coming out. We are actually getting into the Great Depression. It started as early as 1927, had its vacillations. The Black Friday actually occurred in 1929, October 19th. If I remember correctly, and you can check me on that. Let me know. Let me know if I guessed that one right. October 19th, 1929, I think was Black Friday or Black Thursday. Anyhow, stock market fell. And so from 1929 on, up through World War II, was actually the Great Depression. So we had FDR promising the New Deal. FDR was not a popular president. I don't know how he got reelected, but there's a lot of suspicion that the votes were manipulated around him as well. So he became the father of alphabetocracy. He started off with the FHA, the Federal Housing Authority, kind of good. It gives federal government money to loan to potential homeowners at reduced rates, reduced rate loans. Then he also came up with the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps. So if you take a look at a lot of the projects, to include the Hoover Dam, they were made by CCC. I know the LCRA, all 5 lakes on the Lower Colorado River Authority were built by CCC employees, workers. A lot of the U.S. highway system was built by CCC employees. The Tennessee Valley Authority was built by CCC. So CCC did a lot of governmental projects. So basically what it was you became a day laborer, although it was on a regular basis. You became a manual laborer. There we go. That's a better term for the federal government to help with all these different things. That one was never really countered. But the National Recovery Act and the Agricultural Adjustment Administration Act were both challenged in courts, and both of those were done away with. So the AAA, basically what they were doing, and I'm reading about this in my book, in Roth's diary about the Great Depression right now. But the AAA, what it was trying to do was inflation. It was a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. They were trying to control inflation. And at that same time, all the European governments were getting off the gold standard. Money was being fluctuated. The dollar was fluctuating in value. We had all these loans that we couldn't get recovered that we loaned to different countries from World War I. I mean, it was just terrible. We didn't have anybody working because nobody had money to buy things. So if you inject more money into the economy in order to get the citizens to buy more stuff, then that causes inflation because you don't have anything to back the money that you're putting into the economy. Voila, guess what? That's exactly what we've done for the last 5 years. And that's going to be all the way back to that cough of 2020, okay, when we said we were going to start injecting governmental money and pay people to sit at home. That's what the AAA did. So the AAA said, we're getting the farmers prices are going down, because people don't have any money, and the farmers aren't making enough to even warrant producing this stuff. So what we're going to do is we're going to start buying some of that food from the farmers so that they can then make enough money to continue to farm, but we're just going to throw this stuff away or give it away because we're buying it from them. And then we can't compete with the people who are trying to buy it on the free market. So it was a very complex thing. Finally, the Congress, the Supreme Court said, do away with that. Then we had the National Recovery Administration, the NRA, which imposed sanctions on production and in many industries. Same thing. That kind of went away. Then we have a couple in 1935, 1938. So 1935, if we take a look at unions in the United States, so the very first one we had was we had the Railway Laborers Act. So the most dangerous job in the United States was being a brakeman on a railroad train. So what happens was, especially on the caboose, each car on a train had a wheel up top, and when you turn that wheel, what it did was it basically caused the wheels down below on the track to kind of spread so that the back was scraping harder against the rails, and it acted as a brake. So the train would let out so many whistles, and that would tell the brakeman in the caboose to start running along the top of the train and turning all those wheels. Well, that was one of the most dangerous jobs in the U.S., and their death rate was unbelievable. So they came out and they said, well, railway workers can unionize and we can get some better things for them. And so they started trying to do that. That gave way too much power to the employees and not enough power, and so the railroads were going broke because of the power they gave the employees. So then they countered that. So you have this pendulum that's swinging back and forth. Does the power go to the employees or does the power go to the company? We never have found middle ground. So the National Labor Relations Act of 1933 actually gives unbelievable power to the unions. If you take, 1935. And if you take a look at it, I think that's one of the secondary leading cause to inflation today after the federal government spending. Okay. So we want people to have a job. So let's say a guy who stands there all day putting wheels on a car on an assembly line, and he's a member of the UAW, and all he does is lift the tire up. And nowadays it's actually on a pneumatic or hydraulic lift that does it for him. He just has to aim it and line up the lug nuts. He gets $40 an hour plus a retirement, plus 100% health care, plus all this other kinds of stuff to stand there and put a tire on a car for 40 hours a day. So he says, you know what? I do this for 40 hours a week and I can't afford to buy the cars that I make. Oh, you're right. We need to raise your wages. So instead of $40 an hour, now you get $50 an hour. You're also going to get an extra month's vacation because we know how depressing it is to stand there in line for 8 hours a day putting a tire on these lug nuts. So we're going to give you an extra month's worth of labor. What have you just done to the cost of the car? You've increased the workers' wages so that they can afford the car under the old price. But in order to pay for the increase in wages, you have to raise the price of the car. So now that laborer who wanted a pay raise so he could afford a car can't afford the car because they have to raise the prices of the car to pay for his wages. So that's that dilemma that we're in with labor unions and everything else. And I guess I could be a supporter of the National Labor Relations Act of 1935 under one condition. Right now they say that if you read the act, companies cannot spit. So that is, they cannot spy on the employees when they're organizing. They cannot make any promises. If you vote against the union, we promise we'll do this. You can't interrogate employees. You can't ask them anything about what they're doing to organize, and you can't threaten the employees. So that's the SPIT: spy, promise, interrogate, and threaten. Okay, they can't do that. Unions can. Unions are allowed to. I was working in human resources in Dothan, Georgia, right outside of Atlanta, Georgia. And I came back, and the union organizers were actually in my hotel room going through my personal property and going through and trying to get onto my laptop to gain any information they could about me. And I called the sheriff, and the sheriff said, no, they showed me the law, and the law says they can do anything to organize a union. So that includes breaking into your hotel room and going through your personal stuff. And so I could support the National Labor Relations Act a lot more substantially if they would make it equal. If the same things that apply to the companies would apply to the unions, and the things that apply to the unions apply to the companies. The company must give information to the employees about unions and basically allow the unions company time and all these other kinds of things in order to get the union in. Once the union's in, according to the act, no one in the company can ever tell an employee how to get rid of the union. So there's a very narrow window, okay, where employees can organize and vote the union out. But it's like 14 days. But nobody in the company is allowed to tell them when those 14 days are. If they do, then the union contract is automatically extended, okay? So if it was as easy for the employees to vote the union out as it is for them to vote it in, I would be all for it. You know, just make things equal. That's all I want. I would like to see that law finally hit equilibrium where it's in the middle instead of too much power one direction or too much power the other. I would also say unions were essential. They were extremely important and critical from the Railway Laborers Act all the way up until 1968. And the reason I say until 1968 was everything that the unions fought for, the government gave them through acts. And the last act that the unions fought for was in 1968. They fought for OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. They got it. So now the things that used to belong to the union as far as safety and everything else of the employees, remember that's why they were started with the Railway Labor Act, okay, with safety. So they turned that over to the government in 1968 with OSHA. So now they really don't have anything that they're doing, in my opinion, that adds value. So let's go take a look. I'm sure I pissed some people off and they're probably going to disagree with me, but that's okay. That's Lee's opinion. Hello, Global Family Feud. Welcome. How did that work for you, Triple G? Amen. I wholeheartedly agree. Yes. As a matter of fact, Ascension Seton just unionized here in the last couple of years. And the priests who are in charge of Ascension Seton refused to counter the organizing efforts. They said, no, what the employees want the employees are entitled to get. That's part of our religious belief is that every person has a right to something. And so if that's what these employees want, that's what they'll get. The big problem they had with the vote at Ascension Seton was they rotated charge nurse. So let's say if there's 6 nurses in an area of responsibility. So every 6th week, you were the charge nurse. So how do you define who is management and who is not management if 1/6 of your duties are management and 5/6 are not? So are you a voting member or are you a member of management? So you get into problems like that. So that required a district court case in order to settle that one. That was something else. From what I understand, Triple G, they still are. But UPS is not as bad as FedEx. Oh, man, I tell you, FedEx employment is something. They've got 3 different companies, really, that have the name FedEx. So they have FedEx Express, and they have the blue logo. Then you have FedEx Ground. And if you look at a truck, it'll say Ground, and it'll be green. That's a separate company. So although they all fall under the FedEx umbrella, FedEx Express with orange, I believe it is. might be blue or orange. Those are employees of FedEx. So they phenomenal pay, health care, retirement system, vacation, everything else. The ground workers, those are, think of them as franchises. So each franchise has an area where they have the ground deliveries. And so they hire their employees. FedEx has no control over what those employees are paid or anything else, because that's basically a franchise. And then you have FedEx, what do they call it? Anyhow, it's the interstate trucking, and that's a separate company, but they're also employees of the company. So, yeah, FedEx is messed up. Okay, then in 1938, we have the FLSA, the Fair Labor Standards Act. That's still in today. So the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938 did a couple of things. Number one, it outlawed child labor. It's very explicit on what it can do. Children cannot work in certain industries that are considered dangerous. You can't work them more than 2 hours on a school night. There's all kinds of provisions within that portion of the Fair Labor Standards Act, FLSA, for children. The second thing it did was it dictated a 40-hour work week. Okay, and then within that 40-hour work week, if you worked more than 40 hours, then you have to be paid overtime if you're a non-exempt employee. So here's another one of those political decisions, okay? So exempt and non-exempt. So that's kind of confusing terms. So they decided that management was exempt from the minimum wage laws. So that's the third part, is the minimum wage, and then they have the 40-hour and overtime. So anybody who is making a certain amount of money and in a management position don't get overtime, okay? So they don't have to work 40 hours a week. They don't get overtime. There's all kinds of different things that apply to people who are exempt from the provisions of the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938. So what do you call people who have to follow the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938? Well, if you call them followers, subjects, well, if you call them subject to the law, that kind of sounds like they're subjects to a king, right? So they were looking at all these different words. So they finally said, well, why don't we just call them not exempt from the law, non-exempt. So that's how that term came up. You have to follow the law. You have to be subject to overtime pay and everything else. Here's another thing that most people don't realize. There are three versions of the National Labor Relations Act of 1938. So the first version is for elected officials. So if you are an elected official and you have a secretary, you don't have to pay that secretary minimum wage. You don't have to follow the National Labor Relations Act. You don't have to do anything, okay? You can pay that secretary $1 an hour and work them 120 hours a week, and it is completely legal under the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938. Elected officials have that exemption. The second one is governmental entities. So they didn't want to give too much cost burden to a taxing authority. So, if they work people overtime, what they're going to do is they're just going to raise your taxes, and you're going to pay for that overtime through taxes. So they said, no, for governmental entities, instead of paying them overtime, you have to give them compensatory time off, CTO. So for every hour over 40 you work in a week, you have to give them an hour and a half off, okay? So they get compensatory time off. That comes into another decision that is quite confusing, and that is, if you decide to go into work a half hour early, sit and drink a cup of coffee, eat a donut, and read the newspaper, is that time considered work time? Well, there's something that they call waiting to be engaged and engaged to be waiting. So those are two different things. So waiting to be engaged means I'm hiring you to be a greeter, okay? So even though you have to stand at that door and wait for anybody who comes up and you got to greet them. So I'm paying you basically to do nothing until you have to do something, okay? So that's engaged to be waiting. I'm engaging you to stand there and wait to do your job. The other is waiting to be engaged. So if you're waiting to be engaged, you just show up early or you stay late and you do something on your own until it's time to start or finish work. That's waiting to be engaged, and that is not subject to overtime pay. It's not subject to pay at all, period. Actually, it's considered fraud if you claim that as work time. So I just noticed that we're at 1 hour and 10 minutes, and my God, I've probably talked you to death, and you've got so much. And so let me mark this page as this is how far we got. And then I will check and see if we have any questions and see where we go from there. Didn't just Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance have something to do with the, oh, absolutely. Jimmy Hoffa was the president of the Teamsters. And so he basically, he had started out as a local president on the East Coast. And he had basically the Teamsters were being, he had a whole bunch of money in the retirement plan. And the mob wanted to open up the Dunes Hotel in Las Vegas. And so they couldn't take their ill-gotten gains and go to a bank and say, hey, give us money to build this casino and resort. And they didn't want to do that. So they said, wait a minute. They worked with Hoffa, and Hoffa loaned them union retirement funds at like 6% interest rates for the mob to build the Dunes Hotel in Las Vegas. And so then there was this corruption bill, and they got into it. And Hoffa got sent to 5 years, I think it was 5 years, in a federal prison. And while he was there with one of the mob guys who he loaned the money to. And so while he was in prison, another guy got elected as president of the Teamsters. So when Hoffa got out of jail, he wanted his old job back as president of the Teamsters, and he was trying to get it. But the other guy had really cozied up to both the Kennedys and to the mob. Bobby Kennedy was really going after the mob big time, and he was putting a lot of pressure on the on the Teamsters. And so they needed to get rid of Jimmy Hoffa. And so Jimmy Hoffa disappeared. And so it just so happens there was a marriage of one of the mobsters' attorneys, I think it was, and his daughter was getting married, I believe, and almost every one of the heads of all of the mafioso families, and I mean, it was a big mafioso convention basically at this wedding. They were in Detroit the day that Jimmy Hoffa disappeared. So there's a fantastic movie out starring Al Pacino and a whole bunch of others called The Irishman. And he, on his deathbed, this very subject, claimed that he is the one who killed Jimmy Hoffa, and that they got rid of the body by cremating it so that there couldn't be any DNA located anywhere to say that Jimmy Hoffa was still alive. They fact checked everything in this, everything they can prove everything he says in this movie is true, except they still cannot prove that he is the one, or anybody is the one who killed Jimmy Hoffa, and they cannot prove that Jimmy Hoffa's body was or was not disposed of. So yes, there was a lot of, as a matter of fact, there's one famous line, and that is, if the mafia can get rid of Kennedy, they can get rid of you too. And that was quoted to Hoffa. So let's see where we are. Okay. Thank you, Triple G. Appreciate that. So here we are. Book of Numbers, chapter 6, verses 24, 25, 26. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord let his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord look upon you kindly and give you peace. So next week, we're going to continue on with the history and the changing government that we've had. Probably the most dramatic changes we had were under FDR. So we're going to continue on with FDR, and then after him, of course, Truman and Eisenhower, and see some of the things that happened there. The National Highway Act under Eisenhower is very interesting because that started our interstate system. So anyhow, we'll get more into that stuff next week. So please be kind, polite, and respectful to each other. We're all in this together, and hopefully we'll all come out of this together. So take care, everybody. Thank you for being here. And as Triple G said, hit that thumbs up. And if you would, please subscribe. We'll see you tomorrow night at 8 o'clock Central. We'll be talking about the introduction and the first 4 chapters of Food Storage for Preppers, a week-by-week plan on how you can get enough food to survive the apocalypse. Take care, everybody. Have a nice evening. Bye-bye. Let me see if I can't get out. Let me see. I got to get rid of all these other announcements here first. Oh, I got to go see what Prepper Dog has to say. Okay, now I can end the stream. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.